Hello and good morning to you. It is Thursday the 17th of September. It is day 4 of Pensions Awareness Live. Let's see if the crew behind the cameras are awake. That wasn't too bad either for day 4. It's been an awesome week. Thank you all so much in your hundreds for engaging with this broadcast event this week, all about you and your pensions. And just to reiterate that point, this is about you and your pension journey, and we're trying to bring information to you, thought-provoking moments, and helping you get on towards the right journey for you and your family and your loved ones to have an amazing retirement. All week I've been looking forward to today because there's a particular focus today which is about women and pensions. And I'm really pleased to be chairing a roundtable that's coming up right now on the subject of tackling the pension pay gap, the gender pension pay gap. So my name's James and I'm going to be the host for today. I'm going to chair the roundtable. I'm one of the pension geeks, and the geeks are on just a simple mission to improve your final pension position. So first of all, I'd love to introduce to you our 4 lovely panellists who are going to help share their knowledge, skills and experience on tackling the gender pension gap. So first of all, I'd like to introduce Joanne Seegers. Joanne is Chair of the Trustees at Now Pensions. Then I'd like to introduce you to Eleanor Levy. Eleanor is Director of Marketing and Communications at Now Pensions. We also have Kate Smith, Head of Pensions at Aegon UK, and Antonia Balaam, Client Director for Workplace at Aegon UK. So, and just a quick note on that, a really huge thanks to Now Pensions and Aegon for their support and sponsorship of this event this week, because without them this couldn't happen. And that is the pension community coming together to make this happen so we can share these moments with you. So thank you so much to both of these organisations today. So as a quick summary and an intro, and then I will then shut up and give the floor over to the genuine experts on this call. Forgive me if I just read from my script here, because I don't want to get this wrong, and there's a bit of information I just want to get right. So there was some research done last year in 2019 by Now Pensions that revealed that women are generally reaching retirement age with around £100,000 less in their pension pot compared to men. Now, I went to a conference that shared some of these statistics last autumn, and then when I came home with my notebook full of all the stats that I'd recorded, I shared them with my wife, and she said, well, this is an outrage. If men's pensions were crap, it would be sorted by now. So we, in the course of the next 45 minutes or so, are going to do something about raising some of those issues and talking about how we can sort it. And what the COVID-19 pandemic has done is it's compounded these already challenging issues because it's now added the additional challenges of managing childcare and work responsibilities from home. So it does create significant hurdles for women trying to save for their futures, and we'll be discussing what can be done to help this. Aegon have also done some research during the COVID era that we've been in that shows that there's increased gender differences in savings attitudes. So Aegon carried out a survey to just under 7,000 respondents between March and July that shows that coronavirus has widened the gap between men and women when it comes to their attitudes to saving and investing. This could lead to the gender pensions gap, which we should be aiming to reduce, getting bigger in future. So that's my little preamble. There's going to be, which is uncomfortable for me, less of me talking, but probably better for you. So I'm just going to kick off with a question, and just to keep the theme going for all of our broadcasts this week, we love your involvement. These sessions come to life when you ask questions and make it real. So feel free to be making comments in the chat bar. Feel free to be making your observations and asking your questions. I've got a few that I'd like to start the roundtable with, and then we'll open up the floor to your questions, probably about 20 minutes in. So keep them firing in, and behind the scenes, Johnny and Rachel are going to help me monitor them and make sure that we share them. Okay, so in my role as chair, I get the privilege of firing the first few questions and directing who they go to. So this question is going to be for you first, Eleanor, if that's okay. What is the gender pensions gap?
Thanks, James. So, in a nutshell, the gender pensions gap is the difference in pension income between men and women pensioners. So, as you mentioned in the preamble, we did some research last year, 2019, with the Pensions Policy Institute that showed the difference between the average women and men's wealth, pension wealth at retirement, and that gap was £100,000. So the median women's wealth was 51,100 and the man's was 156,500. So 3 times more if you're a man than if you're a woman, which I thought was kind of pretty shocking. And this kind of huge gap was largely down to women working part-time. And this kind of early on in their careers, sort of like 30s, was due to childcare responsibilities in the main. And then actually later on in life, they're still having caring responsibilities, looking after elderly relatives.
So thank you, Ellen. That's a great answer. So I also, last year on the Pensions Awareness Tour, we're doing this virtually this year because of contagion reasons, and that's perfectly sensible right now. But last year we were out and about, and in Nottingham, quite a lot of your colleagues, Eleanor, joined us on the high street in Nottingham handing out leaflets. And you had a brilliant marketing tool to explain to couples walking past the difference in size of pension pots potentially for men and women, and you handed out these leaflets. Can you just expand upon that, because I thought it was really impactful?
Yeah, so we just had flyers that actually showed the difference physically between a man's and a woman's flyer. So the man's flyer was 3 times bigger than the female flyer, but it just yeah, it was a kind of sort of small marketing tool, but it actually really made an impact because you could really physically see the difference. And my son was there with me. He was 9 months old and he loved chewing away on the on the bigger flyer. But yeah, it actually, it kind of did really show just the difference between what you're going to be getting just in those flyers.
And Joanne, do you mind if I just direct the same question to you as well, so that maybe we can hear your comments about the gender pensions gap?
Yeah, so Ellie has given the sort of top line numbers, that sort of gap of over £100,000, which in itself is really shocking and astonishing. It's shocking that we should frankly be talking about this in the 21st century. But I'm afraid to say the story gets even worse. So, if we start to dig underneath those sort of headline numbers, the story gets even worse, I'm afraid, because, one of the features we see of society today is sadly that divorce rates are rising generally, but in particular, divorce rates are rising amongst the over 60s. So about 10% of men aged over 60 are divorced, about 14% of women. And for that group, we see the gender pension gap being even bigger. So the pensions wealth for a divorced woman is only about a quarter of that for a divorced man. So for a divorced man, it's just over £100,000, but for a divorced woman, it's just about £26,000. And if that wasn't bad news enough, the story gets even worse if you are a single mum. So for single mums, their average pension wealth is just £18,000. So that's £51,000 for women in general, over £26,000 for divorced women, and over £150,000 men. So this is a huge problem, and it's something which we really need to find a way to tackle, because if we just carry the way that we are, if we just carry on, letting things roll, letting the sort of, decades of pensions history that we've got just kind of roll forward, then by the middle of this century, by 2060, we will have only closed the gender pensions gap by about 3%. And that simply isn't good enough, because it's just condemning, many women, too many women, to a poor old age. So we really need to come together and do something about it.
Thank you, Joanne. I'm going to ask another question as well. So Kate, why do we have this gap?
Why do we have this gap? Well, it's related really because there's a gap in pay. So we've got the gender pay gap, and a gender pay gap means a gender pensions gap as well, because contributions are typically calculated as a percentage based on your pay. And on top of that, of course, women have much more disrupted working patterns. As people always said, they take time out of work to raise their children. They often return part-time, maybe for many years, maybe the rest of their career. Often it's just for 5 years or so. And then maybe just around the corner when they think they've got it all settled, the children have gone off, left home, got a job, gone to university or whatever, they've suddenly they have to stop work, maybe altogether, to look after their elderly relatives, or their partner's fallen sick. So things they haven't really planned for or thought could happen. So the gap, what we've seen in our research is that women and men in their 20s are more or less, on track. No, they're saving the same amount. They've got more or less equal pay, depending on various other factors. But as soon as you start hitting your 30s, it starts going like this. It changes. Women start falling behind because they are taking on most of the heavy lifting of the caring in society.
Thank you, Kate. That absolutely resonates in my own family, so I couldn't agree more. And interestingly, you've referred to your research there and the impact of COVID-19. Antonia, can I ask you just to tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, so COVID-19 has had an even more impact on women in the workplace. So a lot of the industries and jobs that we've seen furloughed have been primarily female roles, so hospitality, that kind of thing. And also we've seen that actually we have a real sort of education and interest issue, I think, with women versus men. So over half of men were checking their investment returns over the COVID period, whereas less than a third of women were. And that taking that interest and taking control of your pensions and your future, I think, is really key to where we're going to be taking this discussion today.
And is that, do you think that's something that we can get better at using technology? And I'm looking at my phone here and thinking how easy it is for me to check my banking out. But should we all be uploading apps and regularly checking out, the value of our pension pot and being on top of it? Sorry, I should have directed that to someone. So that's going to be a follow-up question for you, Antonia.
Yep. I think, all of the pension providers are developing or have developed apps. And yeah, it's a great way for everyone to be able to be on top of their pension. It's really important to remember that pension is a long-term savings vehicle. It isn't the same as your banking. Whilst those who are really engaged might want to check it every day, we do have to be careful that it doesn't drive the wrong behaviours, because one of the things that obviously has come out through COVID, we had that big crash in investments at the end of March, and what you don't want to do at that point is to panic and come out. And I think that's one of the other things that our research showed, was that a much higher proportion of men felt that while the markets were low, it was a great time to invest, whereas a much lower proportion of women felt the same. And again, comes back to that education point. But yeah, I think technology can absolutely help with engagement. And I think the way we communicate is changing. And I think, providers and consultants are certainly looking at their communications and making sure they are engaging for women as well as for men. I think historically our language has been directed towards men. It's been off-putting for women in some cases. And I think there's a lot that we can do around that area to address this.
Thanks, Antonia. I couldn't echo that loudly enough. He says with an echo in his ear. That's almost poetic. I think the language used in the pensions industry has improved, but I still think it's generally inaccessible. Eleanor, do you mind if I just ask you to, while we're talking about COVID-19, to talk about maybe some of the positives that have come from that, maybe the stigma about working from home changing. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I've been sort of thinking about this and thinking, is there anything positive that could come out of this sort of horrific pandemic? And, the idea of, employers being more open to flexible working, it used to be a much harder sell with only 5% of businesses doing it, whereas now kind of everyone's doing it. And if we're thinking about, women, part-time women, who have caring responsibilities and that's affecting their pensions, how can we get these women back into work, or kind of keep them in the workplace, or help them with the chain tripping that they have to do in the morning when they've got to drop off at nursery, then they've got to get back? One of these key ways is flexible working. So I'm hoping, and I'm starting to see, certainly in now pensions, and actually you see lots of companies are doing this, that they're starting to, question the outdated thinking that productivity is only, in fixed hours in office building. because we're kind of working flexibly and remote working, and people are still, funnily enough, doing their jobs, those kind of old-fashioned thinking, I think, is starting to be challenged. So I think that we will see, or we definitely should see, and for those companies that can, they should, this shift towards being more open and more opportunities for flexible working. And I just think that can only be good for women and their pensions.
Great stuff. Thank you so much for that answer.
Yeah.
Joanne, do you mind if I ask you a question next? Is this just an issue for mothers if we're talking about tackling the gender pension gap?
No, it's not. And I say this, I'm not a mother myself, but, and I've been lucky enough to work for organisations that really take pensions seriously. But I think, this is a problem for everybody, as we saw. Ellie talked about those numbers, £100,000 pay gap, worse if you're divorced, worse if you're a single mum, but it's a problem for everybody. And, I think some of the solutions we've been talking about so far about, people taking more interest in their own pension, more interested in their own sort of financial affairs is absolutely right. But at the heart of it, we need to tackle some of those sort of systemic problems that we've got, some of the structural problems that we've got in our pension system that frankly aren't really built around, they're not built around women's lives, they're not really built around modern working practices, they're not really built around a sort of modern labour force for women and for men that will really start to help more people save more for retirement, particularly people at the lower end of the income spectrum, women and men. I mean, they tend to be disproportionately women, but we need to tackle some of those structural issues if we really to get to the heart of this.
That's brilliant, and it's a perfect segue because tackling the issues prompts me to think about solutions. So, Kate, could I just ask you, what if we're talking about solutions, what can members do to maybe get themselves on a journey that is taking some ownership of tackling the gap?
I think we now have auto enrolment, so that's been a really positive thing. So as soon as someone starts working, they're put into a pension and they benefit from an employer contribution. So that's a start. So members will start saving, but it's about engagement. So providers can support on that, employers can support in the workplace. There's a lot more that can be done, again, using technology. Auto enrolment itself could be slightly tweaked to make it better. So it does reflect modern working practice, just as Joanne said. It's not quite right at the moment, it's a bit behind the curve. For example, you only auto enrolled into a workplace pension once you have £10,000 a year in a single job, or the monthly equivalent. Now there's many more women have lower income because they're part-time, but they might have more than one job. So when you have those jobs together, perhaps they earn more than 10,000, but they're not getting the employer contribution. So that's one thing that government can do in policy. But I think at every level, so members need to be more engaged. We talked about women taking more responsibility, being more financially empowered, being more interested in pensions. But also I would say that you don't know what's around the corner, but you might be thinking, well, in my 30s, I'm in my 20s now, in my 30s, I might be having a child, I might start a family. So it's really good to try to get into the habit of saving in your 20s when you don't have those responsibilities. So you'll build up a pension pot, so you're more resilient to when you're actually taking time out in the workplace to look after a family. So there's lots of things we can do. So we need to get more positive messages out there about what people can do to sort of build up that resilience and that capability before things happen.
And James, I just want to add to that point. So when women as well go on maternity leave, just before they take career breaks and go on maternity leave, really encourage them to just talk to your employer to find out what that might do to your pension. So the employer's contributions will continue, but your contributions will be lessened as your pay lessens. So I think it's really important, as Kate said, education and taking sort of responsibility for yourselves, but definitely find out what's going to happen to you during these kind of breaks. And I know for myself, when I went on mat leave a couple of years ago, I just didn't think about it, and I'm in pensions, and that's because you're pregnant and you're thinking about your sleepless nights and what pram you're going to get. You're not really thinking about your pension contributions, but these are the types of things that are going to affect you later in life. And just lastly on that as well, our research that we did in 2019 said that for a woman to draw the same pension income as men in retirement, they need to be thinking about saving 5 to 7% more to kind of make up for these career breaks and also living longer. So that's important too.
Thank you for that additional point, Eleanor. So I was going to ask what organisations can do as well. So what can employers do? Antonia, what do you think?
Yeah, so I think first of all, organisations need to understand that there are these issues and accept that they are actually an issue. And, you know, we've got, I don't know, lots of companies do, but I co-lead our Women at Aegon community, which is, the aim is clearly to support women in the organisation and to look at all the issues that are facing women and what they can do to take control. And for organisations to be actively trying to close that gender pay gap, you know, and the gender pay gap, to be really clear, you know, we're not talking about equal pay for the same job. We're talking about the fact that men progress further through their career than women tend to. And, you know, how do we break those glass ceilings? How do we make sure that women are getting the same opportunities? And it's not enough for organisations to say, yeah, we know this happens. We've got to publish our gender pay gap these days. Addressing it is the key, and I think women being supportive of each other as well, to recognise these issues and to support each other. And there's a lot of things that women are dealing with. You know, the mental load is one of the things that we talk about that women take on, particularly in the house. You know, how often do you see that the husband goes off to work, he comes home, but you know, the woman is the one thinking about dentist appointments, opticians appointments, getting the kids to the doctors, getting their packed lunches sorted. Have you paid for the school trip? Have you gone through their bags to make sure there's no forms for school? You know, women are dealing with quite a lot of extra things, and it's just making sure that support is there.
Brilliant. Thank you, Antonia. I'm just conscious of time, so I've got one. I just wanted to ask what the government can do, and I was going to direct that at you, Joanne. Is that okay?
Well, I think there's lots that the government can do. Kate's talked about what the government could do to tweak the automatic enrolment rules. If we remove that £10,000 sort of threshold, that hurdle that you need to get over before you can be automatically enrolled, that could bring 2 million people into the pensions club, if you like, and that will be a huge step forward, especially for women. But there's a sort of kink there, because even if you earn over £10,000, the first £6,500, broadly speaking, of your income isn't included in your pension contribution. So that's excluded from any pension contributions. So one of the things that we're saying at Now Pensions is actually pension contributions need to be able to be paid from the first pound of earnings, so on all of your earnings, not just the lot over £6,500. And if we were to do that, that could improve someone's pensions wealth by up to about 140%, make a huge difference. So these are things that government could do. And, you know, one of the answers we keep getting back is, well, you know, these things are kind of quite expensive and, you know, now's not the right time. And, you know, what I say, having sort of worked in the pensions industry for over 30 years, been talking about this for over 30 years, is we keep getting told that now's never the right time. Well, you know, I think what we're saying is now has to be the right time that we attack these issues, and then we deal with the gender pensions gap once and for all. So I think there are some quite straightforward things government could do to really improve automatic enrolment, to really make sure that the automatic enrolment rules really work for everyone. Because, you know, automatic enrolment has been a huge advance, but it isn't working for everyone. So let's make it work for everyone.
That's great, Joanne. Thank you so much. And I have to tell you, someone did ask me that recently. If it's just about money to make things fairer, why doesn't the government just sort it out? Because during the pandemic crisis, the government seemed to find billions and billions from you know, plucked it from nowhere just to, you know, keep the country alive, which is a great thing to have done, but it clearly has the resource to make things happen quickly if it wants to. So why not sort these things out? So I'm completely in agreement with you there. Now, look, we're 25 minutes in, nearly 25 minutes in. Yeah, go for it.
I was going to say, it kind of goes back to your earlier problem, that your opening question. If the boot was on the other foot, I suspect we might have found the money by now.
Is this
so, you know, let's find the money.
If men's pensions were crap, it would be sorted by now, comment I made.
Yeah, your words, not mine, but yeah.
And also that there's going to be a bill that needs to be paid at some point, because you've got, 17% of people going into retirement with no savings, and a further 22%, according to Scottish Widows last year, 8 million people expecting they're never going to be able to retire. So the government will have to pay at some point. It's just when that bill arrives, whether we, now or in the future.
Yeah, and I would echo that. I mean, they can't keep kicking this into long grass. We've seen it again and again in areas of social policy, and I would call this social policy, making sure that people have enough to live on. And unfortunately, we have to do it ourselves. That's why it's so important that women are financially empowered to be able to do it themselves. They can't rely on others, but the government does have to do something. It's got to act a bit quicker. We were expecting some of these reforms that Joanne was talking about to happen in the mid-2020s. Well, we can see that's not going to happen now. So we could be now mid-2030s. I mean, for goodness sake, I'm going to be well and retired, but my daughters will be needing to save in their pensions, and got to start now. They're 20, they've got to start now.
Yeah, hear to that. Okay, so I've now got another laptop on screen for those that are watching and me broadcasting in the studio. We've got some comments and some questions, so I'm going to move to questions if that's okay. So first of all, Rachel has asked, what can the pensions industry do? What role can the pensions industry play in raising awareness of the gender pensions gap? So we've got two of the big pension superstars around this table. I'm going to ask Eleanor, if you could respond from Now's perspective, what can the pensions industry do?
Yeah, I mean, so we've talked about what, individuals taking accountability for themselves. We've talked about employers and what they can do, and we've talked about the government. And I think, those sort of tripartite solutions, I don't think one solution is going to work. I think those three together are really important. So for the industry, I mean, certainly the kind of research that's been out there, we're all talking about the same thing. So I think, the more people in our industry that can get behind these sort of three solutions and talk to people in the language that they can understand, and we touched on this earlier, we need to make things more simple for people, and we need to kind of give them to educate them and give them the tools that they need to be able to, take responsibility for themselves. We need employers to kind of listen to what we're saying about flexible working, and I think everybody getting behind the kind of the things that Joanne was talking about and the lobbying the government would really help as well. We just need a real collective effort to make this important now, and not what the CII did this, great research saying that the gender pensions gap isn't going to be closed to 2050 and pensions parity not achieved to 2100. So these things, if you think about those figures, they are, scary. We need to do something now and make sure that we bring those, those dates down.
Thanks, Eleanor. And can I ask the same question to you, Antonia? What should the pensions industry be doing?
Yeah, so again, I mean, I would echo what Eleanor has already said. It's, is that tripartite relationship. I mean, I do think we have a responsibility in the pensions industry for those communications, how we are doing that. And I think for a lot of people, this will be a sort of new issue. I think the pensions industry has been, very good at carrying on and doing things the way they've always done them. And we probably haven't talked enough about the particular gender issues around pensions. We talk about pensions all the time, but the gender issues and the things related to that, we don't. And I think we need to be doing more of that. We need to be targeting groups at employers and communicating these messages to them.
Thank you so much.
I was just going to say, and technology enables us to do that, doesn't it? So yeah. I think it is promising. It's not as bleak as maybe we think it might be. It's promising out there. There are things that we can do in the industry to support women more.
And I think one of the things that strikes me is just how much agreement there is about what the solutions to this are. So I was speaking earlier in the week to a trade union group. And, so some of the things that I was talking about, that you've been talking about too, Kate, around tweaking those automatic enrolment rules were absolutely the same things that they were talking about too. And, I think, so it's about reaching across. So it's about thinking about the things that we can do as an industry, but actually reaching across. So how do we build a sort of broad coalition to come forward with those answers and solutions, because I think it's one thing to identify the problem, but what I see is a broad agreement about what some of the solutions are. So it's much better if we go to government with solutions, and I think we've got a kind of broad agreement on what they are. So one of the responsibilities I think we have as an industry is to bring all of those different parties together, and that's certainly something we've been trying to do at Now Pensions through our publications, through sponsoring research, and through our various events.
Good stuff. So Nicola's asked a question, and it's really topical given what Eleanor just said. So Nicola's asked, do you envisage the pension gap getting smaller in the next 20 to 30 years as women's work attitudes change and pay gap reduces? So Eleanor, you said, you mentioned 2050, 2100. What's your response to Nicola?
So do I see it getting less, the pay gap?
Yeah.
Well, I would hope, as I said, if employers do their, well, it's our tripartite solution. So, you know, if the government did, if we lobbied them correctly, and then they did one of these things, then obviously that would really help. But I think I'm going to just talk about the employer side, because I just think, as we said, post-COVID, there really is this chance for them to help women get back into work and stay in work. And if we can do that, then then they'll be getting paid more, which means that they can then put more into their pension. So I think, if we look at that, that particular piece, I would be encouraged by that.
Oh, brilliant. And Claire's asked a question. I've been furloughed for the full period and had to opt out of my pension to be able to survive. Are there any statistics on the gender split regarding redundancies or furloughed employees during the COVID-19 era? And so I'm just going to fire that at you, Kate, because you did this research looking in particular about the changes in attitudes and the impacts during the COVID time. So what would you say to that, Kate?
Well, I think we've done some research and we found that generally more women will be affected adversely at the moment. I don't think we've seen the full picture yet. Obviously, the job retention scheme comes to the end at the end of October, and the industries most affected, hospitality, leisure, they're more dominated by women, so more women are losing their jobs. A lot of these jobs are part-time, again, more women. So I think there's more stats to come, but at the moment it's not particularly good on the women front. Now, hopefully going forward, if women are able to do more of these jobs from home, now, obviously the jobs I've just mentioned, you can't do that from home. You can't sew behind a bar from your house, for example, or few people could. So I think we're going to see a lot more on this, I'm afraid.
Thank you, Kate. And Joanne, could I ask you, Martin's asked, should the government guarantee a minimum pension contribution regardless of employment status?
Oh, so this is a question about, I guess, partly about the self-employed, because the minimum pension contribution is 8% going into automatic enrolment brackets, provided you meet the criteria that we talked about earlier. That's obviously a contribution paid for by your employer and yourself, with something coming back in tax relief. But the self-employed aren't included in that. And again, one of the sort of big groups of underpensioned has been the self-employed over many, many decades. So I think Martin's absolutely right. The government does need to focus on helping all groups of employees, regardless, or workers, regardless of whether they're employed or self-employed. And yeah, one of the things that could be looked at is compelling self-employed workers to put money into their pension schemes, because very many self-employed people don't. But whether the government would pay those contributions into a pension for everybody, those 8% into a pension for everybody, I suspect at that point they might fall over and say that's too expensive. But I think we probably also all recognise that 8% is a start, and the number needs to go up. Kate talked about some of the changes the government were promising to introduce in the middle of this decade. Again, looking at the amount was one of those changes. But I suspect compelling the government to put money in might be a step for the government, I guess.
Can I add to that? Because I really like
Antonia.
that question, but I think it probably goes a bit further than what we've talked about, because, what about people who aren't working? And I'm thinking people that are taking career breaks or bringing up children. It's all well and good that you'll get your national insurance credit as long as you remember to tick the right box. You'll get your national insurance credit towards your state pension. But whilst you're at home raising children, all you're going to do is get a credit towards your state pension. If you have a husband that's in work, when he's getting national insurance, he's not only getting a credit towards his state pension, he's also getting that auto-enrolment contribution from his employer. And that creates that further disparity. And where does that money come from? If you're not earning, for women, if you're not earning, you cannot pay it in.
So one of the things that we've talked about is what we've called a family carers top up. So if you're outside of the labour market, but say at home looking after kids, or as Ellie said, looking after elderly relatives, many people, of course, find themselves in that sort of sandwich generation, looking after kids and elderly relatives at the same time. One of the things that we've said is, that is hugely economically productive work and should be recognised and rewarded. So we've said, let's have a family carers top up. So a little bit like you said, in terms of getting your national insurance contribution credits paid if you tick the right box, if you're at home looking after kids, for example, you could have a similar kind of top up for going into your private pension, going into your workplace pension. We've calculated that if you take somebody on the national living wage and apply national insurance automatic enrolment minimum contributions to that, that could be about £850 going into somebody's company pension scheme, workplace pension scheme, and that will be a way to keep things moving and a way to keep things building up. It's not going to be a huge amount, but it will be something.
Yeah. And I think it's about trying to get these people, whoever they are, whether they're working, whether they're self-employed, or whether they're not working, it's about getting people into the habit of saving, isn't it? And seeing that pot hopefully grow. Obviously, there's a big question about, the idea of the sort of pension credit contribution, or whatever you want to call it, or who actually pays this.
Well, so that will be paid by the government in the same way that national insurance contributions are paid for by government.
So Andrew's got a follow-up question, it neatly links to what you've just been talking about. And he said, this doesn't sound like a legislative issue just for pensions, it's childcare too. So what are the government actually doing, and is this being actively discussed by DWP and Treasury? I'm guessing it is, but I just wanted to float that out. Kate and Joanne, you both kind of led in a response to that a minute ago. So Kate, what do you think? Andrew's question was, what are the government doing, and is this being actively discussed by the DWP and Treasury?
Right, so it is being discussed by government. Whether it's actively being discussed at this very moment, probably the answer to that is no. But we do expect the government to come back to that pretty soon. They're probably going to be actively discussing other things related to pensions, such as pension tax, on tax relief on your contribution. So that's probably higher in their mind of priorities at the moment compared to tweaking the auto-enrolment criteria, for example, to encourage more people, or to allow more people to benefit from employer contribution and other policies. So it is in their mindset, but it's probably not the top priority at the moment. Was that fair to say, Joanne, would you say?
Yeah, I think that's right. But I think the other thing it sort of shows, you talked about Treasury and DWP. I think, one of the issues that we've got here is that some of the solutions to solving the gender pensions gap sit outside of pensions, if you like. So it is about childcare. And, as I said, I don't have kids, but one of the figures that I found most shocking sort of as we've been working on this is the average cost of childcare is about the equivalent of, or more than, the average mortgage repayment, which is just eye-wateringly enormous. And so we do need to take steps to make childcare affordable in this country for all sorts of reasons, not least of which will be tackling the gender pensions gap. But of course, this is an issue that sits outside of pensions, but has ramifications for pensions. And so this is about, we talked earlier about, how do we join up, the industry and government. What this is about is joining up government to sort of think big picture, and that's something which we've not always been as good at in this country as we should be. So again, what we're trying to do by highlighting these issues is to try and get governments to think about the issues holistically, and for government to join up, because, you know, and as Kate said, you know, there's always, and as I said earlier, there's always something else that comes along. And so this issue gets pushed to the bottom of the pile, and we're saying, no, this is an issue that affects potentially 50% of the population, but more women in the labour force now than we've ever had before. Notwithstanding the issues around furlough, where absolutely it's women who've been hardest hit there. So we need to keep these issues very, very visible, and we need to keep pressing government to think in a joined up manner.
Thank you. I'm conscious of time, Kate, so I'm just going to ask a couple more quick questions in the few minutes we've got left. Thank you both for your answers there. Amanda's asked, where do all these stats come from, please? So, Eleanor, I think you referred to a few stats earlier. Where did you source all of your information for your statistics?
So our research has been with the independent research body Pension Policy Institute, because we want to make sure that, you know, all of the statistics that we're getting are completely independent. So we often, team up with them rather than just using necessarily our own data.
Okay, thanks, Eleanor. And Antonia, there are two questions that have come in that are relatively similar, so I'm going to try and bundle them together in the interest of time. So Lynn has asked, what should an individual do who's not getting the full pension about resolving this? And Joanne has asked, what would your advice be to a woman in her 50s that's been off due to motherhood for a few years, has been divorced and remarried a few years later? Is it just to contribute as much as possible now? So two similar questions. What should Joanne and Lynn do if they're not really on target for a fuller pension? What can they do about it? Antonia.
So I'm going to caveat this at the start with that we can't give advice to individuals, as is standard. But, you know, taking the question generally, you know, what can women do in this situation? And it is to take control now. You know, it's never too late to start paying into your pension and improving that situation. If you've had childcare breaks, go on the government's website, check your state pension forecasts, check whether you've got that full national insurance history, whether you've received the credits for the time that you've spent caring for your children. Make sure that you understand the full picture of your current situation and do what you can now. The sooner the better.
That's brilliant. Thank you for a brief response, because it means I can ask a couple more questions. So Nicola has asked, do you think pensions are discussed at a young enough age? We talk about saving early, but it's not a priority for many. And she's also added, by the way, I agree, language around pensions is a big barrier. But do you think pensions are discussed at a young enough age? And I think this is probably feeding an opportunity for everybody, really, to talk about education on financial issues, maybe starting earlier in schools. So I'm going to ask that question for you, Joanne, to start with, and then I'm going to ask Kate the same question. So Joanne.
Yeah, I mean, so I think that's the short answer is no. We don't talk about it early enough. We can start talking about it in schools, but I think that's only part of the solution, if I'm being perfectly honest. And actually, auto enrolment is part of tackling the fact that, you know, frankly, none of us ever want to talk about pensions. None of us think we're going to really ever get old, and so by automatically enrolling people into a pension scheme, which has been huge, we sort of take the decision away from people. So short answer, no, but I think, you know, auto enrolment is part of that solution, providing we get the tweaks that we need.
Thank you. And Kate, same question?
Yeah, and it's the same answer. I mean, one of the tweaks is that at the moment you auto enrolled when you're 22, okay, and you have the right income, right salary. One of the tweaks was to bring that age down to 18, and that would help. So, you know, as soon as you start any job, you're in a pension scheme, providing you got the salary, the income, which that might change too. So they need to do that. More in schools, more talking about money in families. I mean, obviously, I've been in the pensions industry for 30 years. I've got two daughters, 20, 22. They're well aware of the need for pensions and savings in generally. They're both at uni, but they're both saving, working and saving. So I think it's about those conversations within the household as well about money. Let's talk about money more.
Thank you so much. Now, I've got a bit of a wave from the camera guys and the guys behind the scenes over here that we're getting very close to our 45 minutes. So I just want to say a couple of thanks. I'm going to say thanks to all of you that have asked so many questions, and I've noticed there's a few other questions that were in the chat bar. There was quite a good bit of debate going on by people in the chat bar that weren't necessarily just questions. But thank you all out there that have communicated your thoughts, comments and questions. But in particular, big thanks again to Joanne Seegers, to Eleanor Levy, to Kate Smith and to Antonia Balaam. I really enjoyed being involved in this roundtable, but please do, all of you, stay connected today. We've got a session coming up at midday with the Minister for Pensions, Guy Opperman, and he's talking about pensions with some school children. So I think that will be amazing. And then I just can't read because there's shine on the board at 2:30. We've got a flexible working session being led by Ellie at Now Pensions. So check out the website. Check what other sessions are available today, get yourself logged on, and then don't forget at 6 o'clock today, oh, by the way, I've forgotten Sam. Sam's doing a session at 4 o'clock, Single Mums and the Pensions Black Hole. So that's Sam from Now Pensions. And then at 6 o'clock, really excited. Yeah, there should be a drum roll for this. Let's hear a bit of a cheer over there, by the way. Very, very, very large levels of excitement about this. There's a Women and Pensions session where Glamour magazine editor Deborah Jones is going to be speaking to an absolute superstar. Am I allowed to say who it is?
I bet you have to ask Ellie. Ellie, are we allowed to say?
Yeah, I think so.
Well, Ellie, you tell everyone.
Ellie's in the car. Ellie's in the car.
I know. It's Ellie Levy. No, we've also got special guest Daisy Lowe, and Sam's going to kill me now because I've forgotten someone else. So you're going to have to turn up and wait and see, I'm afraid. Definitely join in. Really good sessions today at 6 p.m. that one. So hopefully see you all there.
But my final commentary to all four of you, thank you so much for giving up so much of your morning, because it wasn't just the 9:30 to 10:15. You've all been on in rehearsal with us since about 8:30 a.m. So it's time to go and recharge your coffee, your tea, take a breather, and then get on with your day job. So thank you all so much. Have a great day and take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.